Well, good morning, church. Good to see all of you here today. My name is Mark. I am the lead pastor here. And we're going to be talking about week 2 of our evidence series here in just a minute, the reliability of the Bible. But before we go there, I want to give you some greetings and a report, or a little mini report from our last week. For those of you who don't know, I was in Mali, West Africa, a place that Christ Community Church has had a partnership with for 80 years now. And I was able to go and visit some of our friends there. About 9 years ago, we built a hospital there for women and children so that babies could be safely born. And so, after visiting many of our friends, I am obligated and privileged to bring you greetings. So, greetings from the hospital in Kuchala. Greetings from our dear friend Carrie Schleicher, who came from this church and works as a nurse in that hospital. They wanted to give you all thanks for your ongoing support and containers and the finances that helped that hospital to run. And they wanted to let you know that as of now, they have crossed the milestone of 15,000 babies being safely born in Kuchala, Africa. 15,000 babies. And I want to give you greetings as well from Bethel Bible School, where we're training up young pastors and nurses and other people for the future of Mali. Greetings from the National Church. Greetings from tribal village chieftains, from places with names like Munya and Farakala. And I got to go this time, instead of just being in cities, I got to go to some of the villages as well. In one of those villages, I prayed for a tribal chieftain's back problems, and something happened to me that has never happened before. I was given the gift of 4 chickens. 4 chickens, yeah, I mean, upside down, legs tied together, like, here you go, kind of, here's a chicken. So, I packed them up and tried to get them through customs. Did not work so well. Anyway, that was one fun piece, and I got to go to other villages. There was one time that I got a little bit carried away with a tribal grandma, and instead of trying to describe it, just take a look right here. So I think we're engaged now. Well, we're going to give you guys a ton of updates on what happened in Mali as we process things through. Probably over the next 8 weeks, you guys are going to have a ton of information on Mali that you have not had before about where we're headed, next steps, connections that are made there. So be looking forward to and anticipating that. But today, we're going to do something that is a bit unusual at Christ Community. While I normally teach from the Bible on Sundays, kind of picking open a passage and teaching what that passage has to say, today I'm going to be teaching about the Bible. Our series is an evidence series, and one of the important things you have to do if you're someone who's examining the evidence for the Christian faith is you have to take a look at the evidence for the Bible itself. And why should I trust that document that's the source document for the information that you get about God? Wherever you're at in your spiritual journey, it's important to be able to go through this kind of information. Maybe you're somebody who's already a believer in the Bible and a believer in God, and going through this information will help to equip you as you head into conversations with people who are looking for good evidence. Or maybe you're one of those people who says, you know what, for me, before I believe anything in the Bible, I got to have some good evidence that it's true, and hopefully this will be really helpful for you. The way that I find that this oftentimes unfolds in conversations is oftentimes there will be an honest investigator who comes up to their Christian friend, asks them a compelling question about the faith, and the Christian will respond with, well, the Bible says, and then they'll give their answer. And the investigator will say, okay, well, it's great that the Bible says that, but I don't believe the Bible, so I don't believe your source is credible. And at that time, oftentimes, there's a stalemate. And I can understand both sides of the equation. I can understand being on the Christian side of the equation saying, look, this is the best information that I've got. I really don't have anything else to appeal to, so that's why I always say this is what the Bible says. But I can understand the investigator as well saying, well, I just don't believe that your source is the Word of God. It would be a huge leap of faith for me to go from my world of whatever I believe in right now to all of a sudden saying I'm going to take the big giant step to believe that the Bible is God's Word so that I can ingest everything that's inside of there. I mean, why would I pick the Bible? Why wouldn't I pick the Bhagavad Gita or the I Ching or, the motorcycle maintenance manual? If I was just going to randomly throw my faith in something, why should I pick the Bible? And so what I think is helpful to do is to put together a progression from which somebody can move from a skeptical position step by step towards being somebody who can do an examination of the text at an objective basis and then increasingly strong. So here's what I would suggest. If you're somebody who's asking that question about the Bible, why should I trust the Bible, is to start not with asking a question, why should I trust the Bible as absolute truth or inerrant or the Word of God, but instead just ask the question, is the Bible a reasonably reliable historical document? And the reason that you can ask the question this way is that you can take all of the standards for believing in historical documents being reasonably reliable and just apply them to the New Testament. And you can take the test that I would pick, you can take tests that you might pick, apply it universally to all the different ancient texts that are out there, and come to a conclusion. How does the Bible, the New Testament in particular, compare to other historical documents of its day, and come to the place that either it is or is not a reasonably reliable historical document? If you do get to the place where you say, hey, I believe the Bible's a reasonably reliable historical document, you go to the next stage that says, what does the Bible say about Jesus? What does the Bible have to say about Jesus? Now that you've got a historical document, you say, okay, here's a bunch of guys who are writing down what they saw and heard. What did they see and hear? And you do your evaluation of Jesus. Now, if you come to the conclusion, like billions of other people have who have examined these documents, that Jesus is in fact God, that he died on the cross, that he rose from the dead, and he has plans for our lives, then you can ask the question, okay, if Jesus is the ultimate source of knowledge because he's God in the flesh, what does Jesus say, or does Jesus say that the Bible is authoritative? Does he quote from it? Does he submit to it? Does he say it'll last forever, etc.? And you take on Jesus' understanding of what the Bible is, if in fact he is God. Now, we're not going to be able to get through all of these three questions today. We're only going to be able to get to the first one. Is the Bible a reasonably reliable historical document? And actually, we're not even going to be able to get to that full question today. We've got to narrow it down a little bit to a part of the Bible. Many people, as they take a look at the Bible, see a religious document that Christians use that's like one fat book. But the truth is, the Bible is a compilation of 66 books that were written over the course of 1,300 years by over 30 different authors in 3 different languages on 3 different continents from all different walks of life. And so to be able to talk about the historical reliability of all of that at the same time is very challenging. So what I'll do is I'll limit it to the climax of the Bible. And the climax of the Bible happens in 4 books that are called the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we'll also take a look at Paul because he was another source of evidence related to the life of Jesus. So those 5 authors in particular. So we're narrowing this down, and really we're only going to be asking the question, are the Gospels a reasonably reliable historical document? That's what we're headed towards. Now, I got to admit, I know that this message today is full of loads of factoids and things to be thinking about, so I'm going to check in with you from time to time just to make sure that you're still tracking with me, okay? So here's what we're talking about. Are the Gospels a reasonably reliable historical document? Are you tracking with me? All right, that's good. That's good. Glad to know that you're tracking with me. We'll look at 3 different strands of evidence this morning. The first one is evidence from within the document, the author evidence itself. Because you want to know that the authors were people who were credible sources. Now, if you'll open up your programs, there are a little bit of notes on here. If you like to follow through with all the facts that we're covering, some of them are pre-written down for you. This might be a helpful thing for you. But the best kind of authors of a historical document are people who were closest in time and space to the events happening. Eyewitnesses are the best kind of historical evidence. So if you go to a courtroom, the best witnesses in a courtroom are people who were on the scene, who are eyewitnesses and saw it happen. If you go to the news, they will say, eyewitness news at 10. Why do they advertise eyewitness news? Because eyewitnesses are better than secondhand information, or that's why they send the reporter to go on the scene. So the best sources are the closest in time and space. Let's take a look at how close the authors related to the Bible were in time and space. And we're going to start with an author by the name of Luke. And I want to start with Luke because in the introduction to his book, he gives a really clear MO. Here's why I'm writing this book, and you can find out what his agenda is. It says this. This is Luke chapter 1 from the introduction. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things that you have been taught. Okay, so Luke, who wrote this book, and Theophilus have heard some rumors about Jesus. They've heard from some eyewitnesses, they've heard from some other people, and Luke is commissioned by Theophilus to carefully investigate everything. I want you to go from where you are. Luke was from either Troas or Antioch, not exactly sure, but he was a Gentile writer, the only Gentile writer who wrote a gospel. He went from Troas or Antioch down to Jerusalem in order to do his research so that he could write an orderly account for his friend, most excellent Theophilus. Now, we don't know anything about this Theophilus except these three words that we have in the book of Luke. And then, of course, he's addressed at the beginning of Acts, which Luke also wrote. But we find out that by being addressed most excellent, he's probably in a position of authority, maybe a general or a mayor or some other person who's highly respected. And his name, Theophilus, may or may not be his real name. So if you take it apart in the Greek, Theo means God, Philos means lover of, and so this is lover of God. That may have been his real name, or it may be a pseudonym for him. It might be the case that it was just too dangerous for Theophilus to be, for him to be associated with Jesus at this point, so Luke might be writing in code to get to him so that it won't be too dangerous if the letter gets intercepted. But what we learn from this is that Moses, I've been preaching Exodus way too long, that Luke is just trying to write down his investigations. He's a first century investigative reporter coming from the outside, trying to figure out what are the facts around this. So that's Luke. Second thing you have in there, well, let me tell you a couple more things about Luke, actually. Luke has some people Luke has done such a great job of writing that he gets commendations among ancient historian studiers all the time, scholars all the time. For example, Luke gives medical details that make many people think that he himself was a physician, not just giving symptoms, but medical conditions and descriptions that go along with that. Luke also is considered to be an amazing historian. He really gets everything right, from who is at which place, who ruled where, what their titles were, what the historical timeline is. He does such a great job with this that Sir William Ramsay said this: Luke is a historian of the first rank. Not merely are his statements of fact trustworthy, he should be placed along with the very greatest of historians. Then later on, Dr. E.M. Blakelock, who studies classics, teaches classics at Auckland University, says this: for accuracy of detail and for evocation of atmosphere, Luke stands, in fact, with Thucydides. The Acts of the Apostles is not a shoddy product of pious imagining, but a trustworthy record. So Luke is a first-class, first-century investigative reporter writing down the things that he carefully checked out in an orderly fashion. But interestingly, Luke is the least close to the action. Even closer to Luke, or even closer than Luke, is Mark. Mark, my namesake, and therefore my favorite gospel writer, was a close follower of Peter. He was not one of the 12 disciples, but tradition holds that he was one of the 70. But likely he wrote for Peter when Peter wrote the gospel that he wanted to write, because Peter was one of the least educated disciples, a fisherman, and Mark probably wrote in his place. We're not really sure if Mark, the author of the book of Mark, is the same as John Mark in the book of Acts, but we do know that the author of Mark later became the founder of the church in Africa, in Alexandria, as the first bishop of Alexandria. But many people think he anonymously wrote himself into the book of Mark in a couple of key places where you're like, why in the world would anybody write themselves into the book at that place or write a person to that book? One was a person who carried water to the disciples when they were in the upper room at the beginning of Mark chapter 14. And then later on at the end of Mark chapter 14, you might remember the Roman guards came in the garden. Everybody ran away. And there was one guy in the garden who the Romans grabbed his cloak and he ran away naked. And that's right there at the end of Mark 14. And you read that and you go, that's weird. Why would somebody write that into the Bible? Well, some scholars think that the only reason why you would write that detail in is if it was you. And so Mark may have been writing himself in at that point. Okay, so that's Luke and Mark. Then you have Matthew. Matthew was one of the 12 disciples, one of the most educated of the disciples as a tax collector. He probably had quite a bit of education under his belt. And then there's John. And John was the youngest of the 12 disciples, known as the disciple that Jesus loved. He was not only one of the 70, not only one of the 12, he was one of the 3 that was in the inner circle of Jesus. And when reading his gospel, you get a lot of inner circle insights about the life of Jesus. And then finally on this list is one more person who didn't write an official gospel, but he was an enemy of the faith, an enemy of Jesus, an enemy of the early church, even persecuting the early church in other cities. His name was Paul, and Paul had a vision of a resurrected Jesus on the road to Damascus that made him turn from being a persecutor of the church to being a follower of Jesus himself, and in so doing became one of the greatest witnesses and missionaries that history has ever known. So, quick summary. 1 first century investigative reporter, 3 people who are eyewitnesses right there on the scene, and 1 enemy who turned to be a follower of Jesus when he saw a vision of the resurrected Jesus. So the next question that you would ask along the lines of that is, okay, you got 5 people who are writing here. Do they agree with each other? Are they saying the same thing? And of course, on all of the big things, they agree with each other. The identity of Jesus, his teaching about the kingdom of God, the miracles that he did, the stories that he told, his death on the cross, his resurrection from the dead. All of those things are agreed upon between these 5 authors. But there are differences when you read them. I think we need to admit that there's differences between these guys. You have Matthew, who has 5 sermons that are in there that are not included in the other Gospels. You've got Luke, who emphasizes Jesus' teaching related to the poor. You've got John, who has all kinds of symbolic teaching about the identity of Jesus. Each of them includes different details than the rest of them, but that doesn't detract from their credibility. It actually adds to their credibility. Because it shows that just like in a courtroom, if you brought in 4 different eyewitnesses or 5 different eyewitnesses of the same crime, they would bring different details about what happened in that particular crime, but keep generally the main events would be the same. That's exactly what you find with the New Testament writers, not people who colluded with each other and pre-thought up a plan, but people who agreed with each other on the main things just because they were true. And it was the stuff that they saw and they heard. So in the case of the Bible, the author evidence is the best case scenario. People who were actually there, eyewitnesses, an investigative reporter, and an enemy whose mind was changed because of the evidence that was before him. So are you still tracking with me? All right, that's good. Next set of evidence is outside sources. Okay, outside sources. I think the smart investigator will then ask the question, okay, if it is true that those authors have that much credibility, what I really want to know is there evidence outside of the Bible? Are there people who weren't Bible writers, maybe who weren't even Christians, that can give us any information about Jesus? And the truth of the matter is, it's hard to expect that. It's hard to expect that for a variety of different reasons. You wouldn't expect people to write about Jesus because he was just a peasant carpenter teacher. And, you write about famous things. You write about big deals, kings and wars and stuff like that. Peasant carpenter teachers are just a dime a dozen. You wouldn't expect to find any sources because he was only active for about 3 years. You wouldn't expect to find any outside sources because he lived in an obscure, insignificant corner of the Roman Empire. And you wouldn't expect anything because most manuscripts that were written, if anything was written about Jesus, most manuscripts have been lost to the sands of time, so you would expect that it would have dissolved over time. Yet, despite all of this, if you look for sources that talk about Jesus or the early Christians within 100 years of Jesus' lifetime, you find not one, but 5 different sources. 5 different sources outside of the Bible. They include these. One is Josephus, a Jewish historian who is writing for the Roman government. Next one is Rabbi Eleazar, a little bit later on. He was a Jewish historian. You've got Cornelius Tacitus, a Roman historian, as well as Pliny the Younger, a Roman historian, not to be confused with Pliny the Elder, who I'm sure many of you have been reading this last week in your free time. And then there's Suetonius, a Roman historian. 5 different people who were not followers of Jesus and yet wrote something about Jesus. Now, usually these were just little sentences or comments that were here and there in a broader history, but if you put together what all 5 of them wrote and you ask, hey, what are some of the key things we can discover about Jesus and Christians during that time, you'll come up with these facts. And these are facts just from the external sources, not from the Bible. These facts. 1, Jesus was a historical person whose public career occurred in the time of Emperor Tiberius. He was a real live person who really was around. Jesus was called the Christ. People at the time thought that he was the Messiah that they expected. James was Jesus' brother. Jesus claimed to be God. He claimed to be God. They don't say they believe it, but they say at least he claimed that was true. Jesus was purported to have done miracles. Jesus said that he would depart and come again. Pontius Pilate was governor when Jesus died. Christ was executed by crucifixion as a criminal in Judea. So those are the things that you can see there. And you look at those things, you go, these are a very big deal. These are a very big deal. These are some of the main big rocks of the Christian faith. The idea that Jesus claimed to be God, the idea that Jesus did miracles, that he died on the cross, that he said he was coming back again for his believers. These are not little sidelights, these are core ideas that are not only affirmed by the external sources as something that was really real, but these are important because sometimes people will claim that the Christian story, miracles and the death of Jesus, his resurrection and so forth, were myths that developed over hundreds of years. Throughout history, you find the minimum amount of time that a historical person becomes a myth is 300 years, usually more like 500 to 700 years after the eyewitness community dies off. But in the case of Jesus, all of these things were attested to by the people who were there at the time, that Jesus was at least claiming these things. These weren't myths that developed centuries later. But it's not just about Jesus. They also talk about the New Testament community, the Christians. And certain facts you can find out about the Christians include these, that they assembled together on a certain day of the week, that they read the writings of the apostles when they assembled together, that they practiced high ethical standards, that they believed that Jesus was, in fact, God, that they claimed that Jesus rose from the dead, and it says that they were cannibals because they ate the flesh and drank the blood of their leader. A little bit of misunderstanding of communion going on there, but that is what they wrote down. That they spread Christianity to Bithynia, Rome, and Christianity was quickly becoming a worldwide movement. Now, this is all really helpful to note from these sources because it affirms that the same things that were taught in the scriptures are the same things that were believed by the people who were on the scene at the time. This is all really helpful stuff. Really helpful stuff. Now, they don't always say that these things happened, like they say that that the people claimed that Jesus rose from the dead. And I know some people have come up to me from a skeptical position. They've said, Mark, you know what would really help me to believe is if there were non-Christian historians who saw the resurrection, stayed as a non-Christian, and then wrote down that the resurrection really happened, that they saw it. And whenever somebody asks me for this, I go, okay, so let's imagine you're in their shoes. You're a non-Christian who becomes an eyewitness to a resurrection. How long are you going to stay a non-Christian, right? Because what happened with all of the different authors is they didn't believe in the resurrection until they saw the resurrection. And that's the reason why they believed. And that's what we have in our firsthand sources. Okay, so far, here's what we have. 5 different reporters. 3 of them are eyewitnesses. 1 is an investigative reporter. 1 is an enemy who turned back to the faith. Now we have 5 external sources that corroborate what the internal sources say. It's a best case scenario, both for the author evidence and a best case scenario for our external evidence. But we continue on. But before we do, are you tracking with me? All right, that's good. Move on. The next stage is manuscript evidence. Manuscript evidence. And in essence, it's asking the question, is the Bible that we have in our hands today, the one that we read right now, is it the same one that they wrote down? Are the Gospels that we're reading the same ones that the Gospel writers wrote down? 2 ways to think about this. Sometimes a skeptic will say, you know, this book was not originally written in English. It was translated. And if a book is translated, let's say it's written in Hebrew, and then it's translated into the Latin Vulgate, and it's translated from the Latin Vulgate into the Old English, and then from the Old English into the current version that we have, well, translation after translation, you'll lose a little bit of information every single time, right? It'll get more and more distant, kind of like that game that you played when you were a kid, the telephone game, where the first person whispers, summertime is here, and by the time it gets around the story last time, he says, the Martians are landing, right? So they say that's what it's like. Well, if that's how translations happened, that would be true. But the truth of the matter is that the Bible was translated from the original languages, Hebrew in the Old Testament, Greek in the New Testament, and a smattering of Aramaic between the two. So it would be translated directly from Hebrew into English. And when they do the translations, it's not just some schmo that's translating it. They get together a group of scholars who have devoted their lives to understanding the Hebrew language, maybe the book of the Bible, say the book of Job, that they're all translating together. And they get together as a committee and use their combined knowledge to get the best translation possible. And that's how you get translations like the New International Version that I have here and that you have in your pews, or other great translations like the New Living Translation or the English Standard Version. And when you get these, even if you're skeptical about that committee, then you can compare them to the other ones and find out that what we have translated is very much like the original that was written. You do lose some subtleties in translation, but what we have is really, really very good. Okay, so that's number 1. The other thing that people will oftentimes ask, and this is people who are a little bit more savvy in their understanding of ancient manuscripts, is they'll say, you know what, I know that the Bible was written on something called papyrus, not paper, but papyrus, and that papyrus does not stand the test of time well, that when you write on it, that eventually it will crumble and fade into the dust. And so we don't have the original manuscripts of the Bible. Like, we don't have what Mark and Matthew wrote down locked up in a big famous place like the Vatican or the Jocelyn Museum or something like that. What we have instead is, and this is true of all ancient documents during the time, we don't have the original, we have a copy, or a copy of a copy, or a copy of a copy of a copy, or a copy that comes in centuries later, many copies down the line. So how do we know that there wasn't some nefarious monk somewhere along the way who wrote down a translation that got done the wrong way, and what we have today is nothing like what the original looked like? Well, if you're taking a look for what manuscripts have the most credibility, there's 2 things that you want to look for. Number 1 is manuscripts that are closer in time to the original, earlier manuscripts, have more credibility than ones where there's been a big gap in time. Does that make sense? Because the longer the time has gone by, the more chances there are for changing the manuscript. The other question is, how widespread are the manuscripts? Because there's not just one copy that's made of ancient manuscripts, there are multiple copies that are made. So if you have, say, 5 or 8 or 12 different manuscripts that all agree with each other, and maybe one of them has a change that happened somewhere along the way, you can go, oh, there must have been somebody who meddled with the text on that one, but we can see all of the others agree with each other, so to a very high degree of certainty, we can know that this is a reliable manuscript. You guys following this? Does this make sense to you? Yeah, let me ask, are you tracking? Okay, so what we're looking for is shortness of time and breadth of manuscripts. Shortness of time and breadth of manuscripts. Let's see how the New Testament compares to other documents during its day. So that's what a manuscript looks like, oftentimes faded by time there. And here is a graph of the amount of years between the original manuscript being written and the copies of manuscripts that we have today. And I chose as my case studies ones that compare the most favorably to the Bible. Not the worst case scenarios, these are the most favorable ones. So you'll find many of these manuscripts are somewhere between, say, 800 and 1,300 years between the time when the document was originally written and the earliest manuscript that we have today. Homer's Iliad was much shorter than that. It was about 500 years. It's one of the most credible documents we have for manuscript evidence today. And all of these are considered to be reliable manuscripts for the text. Same thing that the original guys wrote down. But the time gap for the New Testament, only 35 years. 35 years from the time that it was written to the first fragment that we can find, which is called the John Rylands manuscript. You can find it at Oxford University to this day. Now, it's a little bit longer if you're looking for full books or the full New Testament, but even so, it compares dramatically favorably to all of the competition. So, best case scenario for the New Testament there. Next thing that you have here is, this is the number of manuscripts, how broadly they were dispersed. Most of them have like 8 to 20 manuscripts that are on this list. And because of that, they're considered to be very reliable historical documents. Homer's Iliad, again, is the second best. It has 643 manuscripts that you can find from the ancient world that all agree with one another. So you say, yeah, that was what was originally written down. But the New Testament of the Bible has over 5,600 manuscripts or pieces of manuscript in the original Greek language. And if you include languages that are not Greek languages, then you have over 25,000 manuscripts or pieces of manuscript from the ancient world, all of which corroborate with one another. Now, there are some of those manuscripts that have some deviations that are in there that kind of go off in a different direction. But if you've got like 10 that have the deviation and 5,590 that are all exactly the same, then you can tell where the deviation happened. What that means is, to a high degree of certainty, we can know that the manuscripts that were translated into our Bible were the same stuff that was written down by the original authors. Are you tracking with me? So here's what we've got. We have a best case scenario when it comes to author evidence. We have a best case scenario when it comes to external evidence. We have a best case scenario when it comes to the manuscript evidence. The truth of the matter is, the New Testament of the Bible, by historical records, is the most reliable source of its day. The most reliable accounts of their day is the New Testament of the Bible. And because of this, you can trust it as a reasonably reliable historical document. If you don't trust the Gospels as a reasonably reliable historical document, in other words, guys just writing down the things that they saw and heard, then what you have to do is you have to throw out every document that we have from ancient history. Everything that we think we know from anybody who wrote things down is less historically reliable than what we find in the Gospels. And so if you throw out the Gospels, you have to throw out everything else as well, and in essence become a complete historical skeptic. Most people aren't willing to do that. It makes much more sense to trust that these are at least reasonably reliable historical documents. When I was 15 years old, I heard a message a lot like this one. And I didn't believe the guy, but I at least believed him enough to say, it's worth it for me to do my own investigation, to check and see if these facts are true, to do my research for myself, to read the Gospels. And it started me on a 3-year journey where, even though I was skeptical, I was open-minded enough to ask the hard questions to get from point A to point B. And the more I researched, the more I found out that it really is credible and that Jesus really is true. I walked with my friend Tim on the video for, 5 or 8 years through this process for him to be moving forward as well. And we want Christ Community to be the same kind of place that's a safe place for people who are investigating to do their research, ask the hard questions, not have to believe prematurely, but when you're ready to be able to take that opportunity to move forward in your spiritual journey, so that no matter where you are in your spiritual journey, you'll find a welcome at Christ Community Church. I've got one short challenge I want to leave you with here today. Lots of long on facts today, short on challenge. My short challenge is just this. Read a gospel. Read a gospel. They are reasonably reliable historical documents, but better than that, they are the documents that have changed more lives than any other documents in this world. You can't call yourself an educated person unless you understand what's going on in these documents, as they are a source of reference for almost all of Western literature. There are over 2.5 billion Bibles that have been sold in this world, and it's been translated into 2,883 languages, more than any other book. It's not because it's a magic book or because it has special powers, but because it points people to the truth about God and about who Jesus is. When you have good news, you should read it. When you have good news, you should share it. And you can read a gospel, get this, the book of Mark, the shortest of the gospels, you can read it in an hour. The longer ones, an hour and a half or 2 hours, depending on how fast you read. Shorter than the amount of time it takes to watch a movie, you can read a gospel. So this is my challenge, is to read a gospel sometime this week. Pick which one you want, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, and read it and find out more about Jesus. For some of you, it'll be the first time. For some of you, it'll be a refresher. But it's always good for all of us to be reading straight from the source documents. And if you're up for that challenge, just say yes. Are you up for the challenge? Yes. All right, can't wait for that. Everybody stand, all of our different venues, please stand, and I'll close this in prayer. Let's pray. God, thanks so much that you're a God who is not silent, but you're a God who communicates, that you love us, you want to communicate your truth to us. Thanks that you've given us your word not just as something that's randomly or oddly placed, but has a huge amount of historical evidence so that people like me who are naturally skeptical can examine the evidence and find out, wow, on one more level, it really is true. And so, God, I pray that you'll help us to take this truth, to hide it in our hearts, take this truth to believe and to learn, and then take this truth as something that can change our city and change our world. And we pray, God, that you'll bless the reading of each of the people as they engage in reading a gospel this week. And we pray this and trust you in Jesus' name. And all God's people said, amen. Amen.